Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. As recently as yesterday, the authorities conceded that they have not yet settled on a theory about how Kiely disappeared. Speaking to the New York Post, Placer County Sheriff's Office Public Information Officer Angela Musalem said, quote, "All scenarios are still on the table because we don't know what happened to Kiely." I've said in the past that one of the traits of true crime rocket scientists is, I wouldn't call it rocket science though, just non-negotiable in this genre, is that one needs to keep an open mind for as long as possible, be curious, and have a scout mindset. It's okay to delay deciding what actually happened for some time. You don't have to it's not like a race to try and come up with the version, given how little information we have. This is obviously the opposite of jumping to conclusions as fast as possible, the rush to judgment you see that is so typical of social media. So over the next 2 to 3 days, we are going to see if we can scenario build sufficiently to develop a working theory. A working theory is not yet a finalized theory. It's a structure that is a sort of work in progress, and one then sees whether new evidence and information helps to reinforce and refine the preliminary structure that we've put together or not. If it does, the structure can be fine-tuned and extended and built upon. If it doesn't, it must be dismantled. So this thought process ought to give those new to true crime rocket science, as well as those familiar with it, a peek into our methodology. This isn't a solo effort, it's a group effort. We source information together and we come up with a scenario together. And we repeatedly ask ourselves at every juncture, everyone together now, does that make sense? We've even got t-shirts with those words on them. Now, you will see how criminal intertextuality is a very, very useful tool when it comes to scenario building. I'll be dealing with that in the live stream later today. For this episode, let's start with scenarios that are past their sell-by date. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So the reason you don't want to nail your colors to a mast either too early or simply before you have enough intel to go on is that once you do that, it forces you into a soldier mindset. Once you've decided this is my theory, then it's sort of a matter of ego that you've got to start defending this early theory. Already I see folks doing that. I see them digging in and fortifying their beliefs. For example, that Kiely's vehicle is in a body of water, or that her friend Kiely killed her, the sort of mean girl scenario. Now, I've just heard from Terry Dean, who was at the sanctuary, and she said the distance to the water is greater in this area than in the actual campgrounds. She goes on to say, with the water level so low, it was really just a trickle at the bottom of the bluff. She says a vehicle could definitely crash down there, and easily, but she says it wouldn't easily submerge. So that's someone who was there in person talking about the area surrounding the sanctuary. So my personal opinion is that Kiely's vehicle isn't in the reservoir, unless the search squads were very clumsy and unless there's some intriguing labyrinth in terms of the reservoir substrate, and all of that is certainly possible. But all things being equal, I don't think the vehicle is in the water. I'm not terribly convinced it's in another body of water either. The Donner Lake is very difficult to access, and I think that simply because her phone loses signal at the reservoir, not some other body of water. I also don't buy the mean girl scenario. Apparently this is quite popular, but I don't think anyone intentionally hurt Kiely in this situation. The fabric was fun, and I think the reason so much is hidden was because whatever happened spoiled someone's fun at a critical time, and that situation remains the same now. Revealing what is going on will also potentially spoil the good things some of these teens may have set up going into the future. For what it's worth, I've never put any stock in Sammy being suspicious or Ronnie, but YouTubers have already succeeded in creating a stubborn following for those conspiracies. I put zero stock in it. Having said that, I do put some stock in the relevance of A, water, and B, someone who knows something. I do think there's an element of truth that someone at the party who could have helped Kiely didn't. And that then brings us to, what do we know? Contextually, we know quite a lot. This is where the rubber meets the road with true crime. Here you start accepting or rejecting certain aspects of evidence, and this is where your weak grasp of reality either goes completely off track or somehow stays on track. In some of these areas, you either accept what is generally known or you don't, and your ability to do that intuitively, sensibly, accurately, and intelligently is what separates the men from the boys, the Sherlock Holmes from the Inspector Clouseaus, the true crime rocket scientists from the wannabes. So what we're doing now is a kind of psychological surgery. One must slice away the dead tissue with care, but to do so, you must also know your tissue, understand the fabric in its context, and have a deep sense of the identity you're cutting into. Do we? So what do we know? Now, I must apologize if the audio isn't synced very well to the what you're seeing, to the video. I am going out tonight, and if I try and sync this perfectly, I'm not going to get the exercise I need done, and I'm also not going to be able to go out. It's going to take hours and hours to do that. So if the audio sort of drifts apart from the video, that's the reason why. I'm also not going to repeat all of it, but we do know quite a lot right now in some basic detail. We know that Kiely arrived at the party with friends. She met people there she knew and mixed with many that she didn't. We know what she was wearing. We know what car she was driving. She knows that she and Sammy returned to her vehicle several times that night, and also, and this is very important, that she texted her mother her final intentions and a time frame that night. According to Kiely's mother, Kiely Rodni Neiman, Kiely texted her mother at 11:30 p.m. from the Prosser family campground, saying that she planned to leave the party in 45 minutes and would come straight home. Her mother told her to be safe, and this is also important. Kiely responded, "Okay, Mom, I love you too." So what changed in 45 minutes? At 12:15, Kiely was supposed to be heading home. At 12:25, Sammy saw Kiely for the last time, and she said, "As I was leaving, I gave her a hug, telling her I loved her and goodbye, and for her to get home safe or be safe." We know Kiely's Snapchat pings inside the campground at around about this time. We also know a large convoy of partygoers leaves the campground at the same time. This was witnessed by David and Jennifer Nepove. We also know her phone is turned off at 12:33. And right here, this to me is where the timeline gets wonky. At 12:36, Kiely calls Sammy and asks her if she needs a ride home. Now, ideally, I'd like to see these texts. I'd like to see a screenshot, proof that this voice call was made in particular this voice call. If Kiely did call Sammy, well, then it shows Kiely was clearly seriously out of it, unable to recall a conversation she just had 11 minutes earlier. The other reason this call is odd is that it happens after Kiely's phone was turned off. So who turned off her phone? And did it turn itself off? Did Kiely turn it off? Did someone else turn it off? Or did it fall into the water? And then who turned it back on? How did it end up being turned back on? Now, it's possible at this point, with no one around her, no one that knew her, and no one to look after her, and already seriously intoxicated, Kiely had ingested flunitrazepam, also known as Rohypnol. It could also have been midazolam. Both these substances interfere with cognition, specifically causing a loss of ability to create new memories. It's also known in the sort of regular parlance as the date rape drug. Of course, it doesn't have to be either of these substances. It could also be just plain ordinary alcohol in excess, or certain recreational drugs in excess, or combinations of both in excess. Sammy provided some detail referring to how they often drank the same thing and from the same cup. That's true, but what about when Sammy was no longer there? When the convoy leaves the camp, it seems Kiely doesn't, if Sammy's memory is accurate. Sammy said, "When she called me, Kiely was not in a car. I could hear the party and people, many people, talking in the background." It couldn't have been too many people because Sammy and her ride had gone, and shortly after that, a huge group apparently left. So one has the idea that a few of the more die-hard party animals were still there, perhaps 20 people, perhaps 10. This is where the identities of the older guys present at this party becomes important. To reiterate, I do think there's an element of truth that someone at the party who could have helped Kiely didn't. It's clear that a very drunk Kiely, without anyone who knew her, who had a car but couldn't drive, and who was really relying on the charity of strangers, was suddenly in a very vulnerable situation. If she wanted to go home, perhaps the guys around her figured they could get her to stay, perhaps get her to do other things by getting her even more intoxicated. That's a regular theme in these sort of young get-togethers. Not by offering her anything directly, but perhaps by slipping something into her drink indirectly. And that brings us to our top 5 scenarios. And if you disagree with me, you're welcome to make your arguments in the comments. I'm all ears if you've got better scenarios, if they're better thought out. So my number 1 scenario is the Pulp Fiction unhappy ending. In this scenario, Kiely overdoses, perhaps not instantly, and so she might be sort of semi-conscious or a bit groggy or half asleep, and perhaps those around her think she's sleeping or passed out. They don't actually know the state that she's in. Whoever finds her then begins the process of covering up, because it's just not just what's happened to her that's a problem. It's what that person has also been doing, and that person's friends. And then in this scenario, to cover up everything, her phone and vehicle are taken as well. Number 2, crashed in a ravine. I still think this is a very strong possibility. Each day that goes by, maybe each week that goes by, I think it's maybe less likely though. In this scenario, on the way home and close to home, Kiely's vehicle leaves the road. We've already found out that the road home is quite treacherous. It is completely in a rural setting. There's no lighting. It's a windy road and so on. And so could she have gone off the road somewhere in that area? Although this remains, as I say, a strong possibility, particularly given Kiely's stated intentions, "Mom, I'm coming home," one would imagine the vehicle would have been found by now and her phone would not have turned off at the campsite. It's also possible there's a lack of signal closer to her home, but that can only be confirmed through practical demonstration. Well, guess what? We have just tested that out, and apparently the signal was strong throughout. So that then seems to discount that theory. The next scenario is number 3, abducted after the party. Did Kiely need to stop to put in fuel? Is there a gas station between the campground and Kiely's home? Well, there is a Shell just outside the Truckee Elementary School, about 2/3 of the way to the Lost Trail Lodge from the Prosser family campground. If you think like a teenager and you remember that gas prices have been higher of late, it's possible Kiely felt she needed to refuel for the last few miles home. Could she also have run out of fuel and then someone came to help her and then something happened? Also, was the after party at or near Donna Lake? Where was the after party? Did Kiely give someone a ride, figuring it was on the way home anyway? The next scenario is abducted at the party. Personally, I don't think an abduction is likely, and even less so at the party. Number 5, drowned. This is an alternative to the death via intoxication theory, but if Kiely drowned, one would imagine someone would have called 911. Thus, we have to imagine a scenario where Kylie's life was in danger and those around her felt summoning the authorities would be endangering themselves. That is a motif repeated in this case. If we go back to what the authorities said to the New York Post just yesterday, this is quoting from the New York Post, quote, "Authorities have repeatedly told community members they'll turn a blind eye to the illicit acts in the interest of finding the teen." While we don't condone that illegal activity, for the purposes of this search and investigation, that is not our priority. We don't want to take partygoers to jail for drugs or underage drinking. We want to find Kiely. And that's according to the police spokesperson, Musalem. And that then brings us to intertextuality tests. To repeat, I can't help drawing intertextualities with the Summer Wells case, but there are plenty of other intertextualities to test, and we're going to do that later today in the live stream. I'll put a link to that live in the description, and make sure to hit the notify me button now at the link in the description to make sure you don't miss it. Thank you for listening. Wherever you are, stay safe, enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.